Hello, Soundies. Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It's the 18th of August, 2024. It's great to have you all here. Hope you're all doing well and staying cool enough in the northern hemisphere, warm enough in the southern. All right, let's hop on over to our agenda. As always, this is a workshop which goes along with our courses at school.learnlightandsound.com. And if you'd like to be notified of these live streams and what the topics will be and be able to submit questions, go ahead and get yourself signed up over at school.learnlightandsound.com. It's free to sign up, and then there are also courses available for purchase there. Today, we are going to take a look at some new-ish microphones from Rycote, the same company that makes lots of windshields and wind protection. Sorry about that click there. That was me fiddling with the microphone case. So these are specifically what we're going to look at today are pencil condenser microphones. So the type of thing that you would normally use on a boom pole for recording dialogue, generally indoors, but you could do it outdoors as well. So that is the topic for today. There were no questions submitted ahead of time. I think we have a lot of people on vacation, or the courses are just so amazing that everyone has all their questions answered, or whatever the case may be. But we will go to the chat after we take a listen to these microphones. So with that, let's go ahead and let me just give you a little background. So as I mentioned, historically Rycote, which has been in business for quite some number of decades, has historically made windshields and shock mounts for microphones. And we talked about shock mounts and windshields just a few weeks ago, and in fact looked at some of Rycote's products in that space. So that's what they did more traditionally. I believe I don't know the exact date, but they were sold to a larger company called Videndum, which owns a bunch of different companies that produce gear and software for video and filmmaking. And so they're now part of that larger company. And it's my understanding that the person that originally started or worked at, that originally owned Rycote has now gone off and started their own other company, a separate company. But since they've been at Videndum, they've started making microphones as well. Now, they first announced their shotgun microphones in 2021, and we actually did a review of a couple of those. So they have 3 different shotgun microphones. This is their medium shotgun mic. This is the HC22 right here. So this is I'd call this a medium shotgun mic. And then they also, at the time, have put out a short shotgun microphone right here. And this is the HC15, I believe. Yes, HC15. Since then, they've also introduced a longer shotgun microphone, so that's also available. But we're not talking about shotgun microphones today. Instead, we're going to talk about specifically pencil condensers. And I believe they announced their pencil condenser mics in 2022. So these are going to be, again, the types of microphones that are significantly shorter. They don't use an interference tube like a shotgun microphone does. And typically for recording dialogue, we'll usually use a pencil condenser with a supercardioid, a cardioid, or a hypercardioid polar pattern. So fairly directional, and it kind of ranges across those 3 different types of polar patterns. Now, the one thing that they claim, and we will hear today to see if that's true, but they do say that their family of microphones is voiced so that you can transition seamlessly between the different mics. So for example, if you're working on a piece where you have a dialogue scene indoors and then you have a dialogue scene outdoors, you might switch from one of the pencil condensers indoors to one of the shotgun microphones outdoors. And the voicing that they use it's a very signature Rycote sound. It shouldn't require a whole lot of EQ to make that a very seamless experience for the audience. So that's the idea. Again, we'll listen to some of those. And then, of course, they also say that there is some RFI shielding, so it should be fairly immune to radio frequency interference. So with that, let's go to our overhead camera. Let me just show you some things here. We're going to nerd out a little bit here, so I hope you have a good set of headphones you can put on. You'll want to put those on if you want to hear carefully and hear a lot of the nuance that we're going to hear here. But I have a variety of different microphones that I own and typically use for dialogue recording indoors. We have the Sennheiser MKH50 right here. We have the Audio-Technica AT4053B right here. And then we have the Schoeps CMC641 right here. These two, the Schoeps and the Sennheiser, are supercardioid, have supercardioid polar patterns, and the Audio-Technica has a hypercardioid polar pattern. And then over here, we have, this is the Sennheiser MKH8050, so kind of the newer iteration of their larger, and it's actually a modular system as well, so you can actually change out, you can put another module in here, for example, an EQ or at least a high-pass filter in there. All right, so those are some of the kind of the traditional suspects that I use when I am recording dialogue indoors. And just to show you, let's bring these others in from Rycote. So I got to keep all these windshields or these foam covers straight here. This one's actually already in a clip, so let's pull it down off the clip. Okay, just want to make sure I don't interfere with the sound. And we'll pull this down. Okay, this is the cardioid microphone. This is the CA08 from Rycote. And it does come with that foam shield as well. Just for comparison, here is the MKH8050 next to the C8. So it's just the Rycote is barely larger than the 8050. And we'll listen to all of these head to head so you can hear what they sound like. They also sent over the omnidirectional one. Now, this is interesting. The omnidirectional one, you'll notice, of course, that there aren't the slits on the side of the capsule module there. And they come in these cases here. That's what you hear snapping closed. It has sort of a magnetic latch. This one would be more typically used for recording ambiances or recording musical instruments, more likely. So it'll be fun to try that one out. I haven't tried this one out yet, but we'll listen to it today just out of curiosity. And then the third one that they sent over is the bi-directional or figure 8 polar pattern mic. And that's a larger one. And you can see here that it has a grill on this side and on the opposite side. So it is sensitive, picks up sound from this side, and then rejects sound from this side straight down or underneath. So that is a figure 8 or they call it bidirectional. They also have a dot here, which I assume means that is the positive side. So this will be important when you start doing things like mid-side stereo recording. In a mid-side stereo recording setup, what you typically do is you have your bidirectional mic, say the sound source is that way. I would have the bidirectional mic with the capsules facing off perpendicular to the sound source, and then I would place the cardioid microphone directly at the sound source like this and record the two of those. And that's what you saw in the thumbnail, if you saw the thumbnail a little earlier. So this is bidirectional, omnidirectional, cardioid. And you might ask, well, where is the supercardioid? Well, that's the one they didn't send me. And interestingly, that would be probably the one I'd be most likely to use for recording dialogue, certainly. We'll see if we can arrange that as well. But this is what we're starting with here and what we'll listen to today. So with that, what I think I'm going to do is I think the one that I am probably going to use most for dialogue will be the cardioid version of the mic here. So the CA08. I'm going to go ahead and put that up in a clip here. And we'll get that rigged up. And then what I can do is that'll allow me to kind of A/B mic. So I can let you listen to my voice, which now is getting a little bit froggy here. You can listen to my voice through the Rycote, and then I'll also hold up there a variety of different microphones. So each of these others that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and move these out of the way. And I think what we'll do is we'll start with the MKH8050. So I'll go ahead and put that in a rig here. And I'm going to put that in this mount right here. This is just a shock mount so that we don't bump things around too much. And actually what I need to do is adjust this here. So first I'm going to move it. Let's see here. What I'm probably going to need to do is take the foam cover off. And then get it into the clips. Very tiny, tiny mics here. There we go, that should do. Tighten that down. And let's twist it a little bit. Make it easier to get the microphone connected, or the cable connected here. There we go. Okay. All right, there we are. There's our 8050 all rigged up there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take the foam off of the others just so we can compare apples to apples. So I'm taking the foam off of the Rycote as well. And I need to get the Rycote connected up. And today's signal chain, just so that you're aware as we go through this here, we're working with the, everything is being routed through the Mackie DLZ. And that then goes line out into the Canon C200 camera. And then that is digitized at the camera. And then from there, it goes into the ATEM Mini. So that's what you're hearing today. And these clips, it does come with some, the Rycote microphones come with these clips here. And they're extraordinarily stiff. So your microphone's not going to fall out of them. And you do have a screw here that you can tighten up the little hinge here. All right, let's go back out to the main camera then. All right, what I'm going to do is put on my headphones and let's go ahead. You've been hearing me through the Earthworks Ethos microphone up to this point. Let me go ahead and switch on over to the Rycote. Okay, this is the Rycote C08 and it's boomed just above me right here. And this is what this one sounds like. So let me just read a little something for you here. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you were quite sure of the fact. All right, now we are on the Sennheiser MKH8050, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and read the same thing here. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you were quite sure of the fact. All right, and now we're back on the Rycote CA08, the cardioid version of the microphone, so that you get a little sense for the difference there. Could you, Danny, hear a difference between the two?
Not much.
Not much of a difference? Okay.
I wasn't paying close attention though, so
Okay.
you put me on the spot.
I put Danny on the spot there. I didn't ask her ahead of time to check that. But let me go ahead and switch back and forth again. Right now we're on the Rycote. It's going to be a little bit more roomy sounding because, of course, it's in a boom situation versus close mic'd like this is here. So again, this is the Rycote as of right now. And let me go ahead and put the Sennheiser up here. And then I'm switching over to the Sennheiser. This is the Sennheiser MKH8050, which sounds a little bit warmer to me, a little bit more bass response. So just for a quick comparison, again, Sennheiser MKH8050. And now we're back on the Rycote CA08 for comparison. I would say that the 8050 to me sounds nice, very nice, but it does have a bit more of a bass boost, I would say, to it. And that's, I think, kind of a signature Sennheiser sound there. All right, let's go ahead and rig up a different microphone. Go ahead and leave your comments in the chat here. Would love to hear what you have to say about them. Christopher says the Sennheiser sounds a bit more muddled. Interesting. Okay. Or maybe, is that muddled or muddied?
Muddled.
Muddled. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the Earthworks for just a moment here while I switch this out. All right, we're back just for a palate cleanse or an ear cleanse, if you will, on the Earthworks Ethos. Well, I disconnect the Sennheiser and we'll connect another mic here.
Do you want to take questions yet?
Yeah, let's go ahead and pop any comments or questions and what your experience was between those two.
Well, we're going to go back a little more than that, if that's okay.
That's okay. Danny says Videndum owns Manfrotto, Gitzo, Vinton, Sochtler, and O'Connor, plus Teradek, Light Panels, and others, I believe. That is correct. So as I mentioned, they own a variety of different other filmmaking product companies. So they own a whole bunch of sort of a conglomerate there.
Okay.
All right. Are these Chinese-made mics? I don't know the answer to that question. I can say that the fit and finish and the feel is very nice. So I believe that Rycote, most everything that Rycote has manufactured in terms of their windshields was actually manufactured in the UK. I'm not positive on that, but
Here's the next one.
there's nothing that says specifically I don't see here. Christopher says, maybe I missed it, but are these loaners or are they letting you keep them? So yes, good point. Glad you brought that up. So we marked this video as promoted. They did send these to me free of charge, and I'm working on a review video. So these are the Rycotes, I should say. The Sennheiser MKH8050. I did some consulting work for Sennheiser a number of years ago, and this was their payment to me. The Sheps I purchased with my own money. The MKH50 I purchased with my own money. And the Audio-Technica AT4053B I purchased with my own money, just for clarity on all of those different things. I'm wondering who actually built these for Rycote. I assume it's another company within the parent group's ownership. I don't know. Audix is another company in the group that makes microphones, has for a while. They work most of their microphones appeal to folks that are working in music versus production sound. So I don't know if it was a joint, like a partnership with Audix and Rycote, not sure. Ian says, Sennheiser sounds better to my ears, warmer, more isolation. Okay, interesting. Good. Thanks for sharing that. Christopher says it's apples to oranges, but the Earthworks sounds significantly better. Is there EQ dynamics on the Earthworks chain? Yeah, sorry. Let me clarify. We're not comparing to the Earthworks. We should, what I want to do is compare the boom mics to boom mics. So it'll be the cardioid Rycote versus any of the other various cardioid boom microphones. And I'll position them all up here, boomed above. So that's what we're listening for. With that, let's, do we have more that we want to go here? I hear more room noise from the Rycote. Oh, interesting. Okay. Good. 8050 better. Okay. Do you still prefer the 8050 more than the 50? It depends. They're actually very similar in their sound. I prefer the 50 actually if I am hand cueing a boom pole back and forth. This tends to be more, in my experience, more immune to any sort of jostling and mechanical movement and picking that up as sound. The 8050 is extraordinarily sensitive to that type of thing. So you have to have a really, really good shock mount for the 8050. To me, the Rycote had a low-end resonance that the 8050 did not exhibit. 8050 seemed cleaner. Okay, interesting. Good. Okay. Good. All right, let's now compare the MKH50 to the Rycote CA08. So here we go. All right, we're starting with the Rycote. This is the Rycote C08. Again, boomed right up here, just out of frame, and it was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you were quite sure of the fact. Now we are on the Sennheiser MKH50. This is a Sennheiser MKH50 Super Cardioid. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Oh, I am so sorry. We are back on the Rycote. This is the Rycote CA08 Cardioid boom microphone. I'm going to call it a boom microphone because that's how I would use it. And this is what it sounds like relative to the Sennheiser MKH 8050. Let's switch back and forth one more time here. Here we are back on the Sennheiser MKH 50. This is the Sennheiser MKH 50. We've just had a quote from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, A Study in Scarlet. And here we are back on the Rycote CA08 cardioid microphone. Okay, let's see what people have to say about these. The MKH50 and RC08 seem much closer to each other than the last one. Interesting. Okay.
I disagree with that.
Danny disagrees with that.
I think the Rycote sounds much more nasal in this comparison.
The Rycote to Danny sounds more nasally. So and it kind of emphasizes some of the nasal characteristics of my voice. Interesting. What do other folks have to say about it here? Ian, again, the Rycote sounds great, but immediately I notice the Sennheiser isolates your voice and sounds warmer. The Rycote, I hear every bit of clothing rustling and surrounding noises. Yes, okay, so that could be a couple of things. One thing to keep in mind is that we're not comparing apples to apples because we're looking at a cardioid version of the microphone, the Rycote, versus the other two have been supercardioid, so more isolating types of microphones, at least in the front and on the sides. They're more isolating, so that could be part of it. Mark says, MKH50 and Rycote sound surprisingly close. Very good. Okay. I'm biased. I love the MKH50. Rycote seems thinner to me. Yeah, it definitely is. It has less bass response than the MKH50 does. I completely agree. Michael says the MKH50 sounds best to his ears. Very good. MKH50 volume seems ever slightly louder. We can adjust for that. Okay, we're still on the Rycote here. And let me switch over to the Sennheiser. This is the Rycote. This is the Rycote. This is the Sennheiser, and this is the Sennheiser. I can actually adjust the gain a little bit. So this is the 50. And I've just adjusted the gain down. We're at 49 dB of gain. And now here we are back on the Rycote. This is the Rycote SC08. Back over to the Sennheiser. This is the Sennheiser MKH50, just to kind of volume match those a little bit better. Okay, and then we're back over on the Rycote. All right, cool. What other thoughts do folks have, just out of curiosity? Mark says the MKH50 much more rounded sound. The Rycote seems, or the Rycote more nasally. I have interesting news for you. I do have a nasal quality to my voice. So I would probably say that the Rycote is more true to life. What she said. Very good. Yeah, there is definitely a nasal quality to my voice. So typically when I am finishing something, I will often EQ it. If I'm trying to get the warmest, nicest, most pleasing sound, I will typically EQ. Definitely something around the 900. Well, I don't know if you want to call this nasally or not, but whatever it is, there's some mid-range kind of harshness in my voice that typically when I EQ, I will pull some out around 900 to maybe even up to 2K, depending on the microphone. Danny says, not sure those of us focused on production really understand the mic market. There would seem to be too many manufacturers when you consider Schoeps, Sennheiser, Sanken, Shure, Sony, just to cover S. That's a very good point, Danny. Yep. And we haven't even talked about Audio-Technica yet. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and get the Audio-Technica queued up here.
Here's some more.
MKH50 sounds nice from Shoji. Okay. Oh, Camille, this is for some coffee and apple pie. Thank you very kindly. Looking forward to that. MKH50 has more bloom. Interesting. That's not a term that I have heard used a lot when we're describing microphones, but it's a very interesting one. Thank you, Michael. Ian says, Rycote seems to place your voice right in my face, and it sounds like I'm sitting there in the room with you. Sennheiser, I feel like I'm listening to an audiobook. Rounded and balanced. Oh, that's I think, a fair way of putting it. I would say, if I had to do it in one word, I'd say that the Rycote's a little bit more clinical sounding, and the Sennheiser is a little bit more flattering. Mark says, I would believe the theory that Audix is involved. It would be interesting to test it against the Audix SCX1, which, for those that are not familiar with that microphone, is I believe, a hypercardioid pencil condenser microphone. All right. Well, while we're here, another one. What would DPA pencil be? 4018? I believe it is the 4018. Yes, Christopher. That one I don't have on hand, unfortunately. But next up, we have an Audio-Technica. We can certainly compare that. So we're just making our way down the line here. And let's go ahead and compare this one while we're here. All right. So we are on, currently, we are on the Rycote CA08. This is a cardioid pencil condenser microphone. A little bit of clothing rustle for you, or friction. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Now, this is the Audio-Technica AT4053B. This is a hypercardioid. How does that sound volume-wise? Is it similar to what the Rycote was? Let's go back and forth. Here's the Rycote. This is the Rycote CA08. And this is the Audio-Technica AT4053B. Similar, roughly? Okay. This is the Audio-Technica. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. She sells seashells by the seashore. We were back on the Rycote. She sells seashells by the seashore. Okay. Curious. Did it sound more sibilant in the Audio-Technica to you? It did to me too. So we're back on the Rycote. This is the Rycote. And this is the Audio-Technica. Audio-Technica 4053B. She sells seashells by the seashore. Back to the Rycote. She sells seashells by the seashore. Okay, curious what people think about the Audio-Technica 4053B. Notice this is the one hypercardioid microphone that we have. So it has the narrowest lobe of sensitivity on the front and a little bit more of a tail on the back. So you may hear a little bit of room noise, at least directly behind the microphone, but that's the Audio-Technica 4053B. This was probably the first very directional boom microphone that I bought, non-shotgun mic. A bit more bass in the AT4053, no? I would say it sounded a little muddier to me. It did have more bass, but it was not really great bass. It was a little bit muddy. Audio-Technica and Rycote have similar sound signature. Okay, thanks, Michael.
This is back to before.
Back to before. Ian says, clinical is the perfect word. If I was making one of those TV shows where they try to pick up faint paranormal voices in an empty house, Rycote would be my go-to. Turns out those shows are very popular, so it might not be a bad choice at all. Very good.
I'm behind. They're not showing up. Oh, here we go. Okay.
All right. AT4053B lost some high end over the Rycote. Yeah, it did seem a little more muffled to me, I think. Good point, Mark. Did I say I was biased to the MKH50? LOL. I understand, Matt. Mark says, sounds to my ears that the 4053B seems to have more of a dip in the mids. Interesting. Interesting. Thanks, Mark. Ian, sibilance feels similar, but Rycote, I feel like you are speaking right next to my ear. AT, I assume that's AT. I feel like you're at a slight distance. Sennheiser still wins to me. Thanks, Ian.
There's one more coming, I think.
Okay. A couple more. Here we go.
Okay.
Everybody loves the MKH50, but have you ever compared an MKH40? Same mic, I believe, only a slightly different polar pattern. I believe that's a cardioid. And no, I haven't used that one personally. But I've never been I've never been disappointed with any of the MKH series from Sennheiser. Never genuinely disappointed in the way they sound. Some of their consumer level mics, not necessarily a huge fan. And the 8050, again, as I mentioned, and I suspect probably the 8060 a little bit more sensitive to handling noise than I'd like. But in any case, okay, let's go ahead and get another mic up there. So that was the the Audio-Technica 4053B. Now let's put a Sheps on there. What do you say? Just for comparison, this could be an interesting one because some people really, really love the Sheps sound. Okay, this is the venerable CMC 641. It is a super cardioid polar pattern mic with the Colette preamplifier module. It's the gray microphone. You've seen those before probably. Let's go ahead and compare. So I am still on the, your ears have been hearing this entire time, the Rycote CA08. That's the cardioid version. And before I do this, I'm going to go ahead and read the Sherlock Holmes quote. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. This is the Sheps CMC 641. How are we volume matching?
I don't know.
Danny is cringing right now, so I'm going to switch back to the Rycote. Okay, we're back on the Rycote. I need to hear this. So this is the Rycote CA08. What's going on? Checking, 1, 2. Why do you have that look on your face?
Because that one sounds strange.
Okay, let's go ahead and put that up again. So we are on the Rycote for the moment. Let's go ahead and get a sample with the Sheps. And here we are on the Sheps. I think that needs some gain is what it needs in part.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the Sheps CMC 641. Sheps CMC 641 versus the Rycote Rycote CA08. This is back to the Sheps, and this is the Sheps CMC 641. This is a supercardioid polar pattern. She sells seashells by the seashore. Back on the Rycote, she sells seashells by the seashore. Interesting. Okay, so let's hear what folks have to say about the difference between those. We are still on the Rycote here while those comments come trickling in. We did gain up a little bit. Actually, let me go ahead and read the Sherlock quote again now that we gained up. So this is on, first of all, let's start with the Rycote CA08. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. We are now on the Sheps. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Back on the Rycote, Rycote CA08. Ooh.
Okay.
Okay, so I will say this. The Sheps seems very harsh on my voice. Does not sound great. What does Danny have to say?
I think they sound pretty similar, but the Shep sounds farther away.
The
Especially when the gain was lower.
Yeah, okay, so the gain, so the Sheps sounded farther away, less in your face. Okay, good.
Okay.
Here comes the comments. They're rolling in.
Stop.
Ian says, they now sound fairly similar to me. Interesting. Okay, good. The Rycote is starting to sound default because you've been on it so much. When you're first switching from the Earthworks, it sounded much poorer. That is a phenomenon that's very important to understand, and that phenomenon, there are different names that it goes by, but you just get your ears and your brain that's processing the signals from your ears get used to things over after a while. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. In fact, let's go ahead and switch back to the Earthworks just so you can hear that. Now here I am on the earthworks. And there are a couple things going on here. It's not just a different microphone, it's also a very different position. It's much closer to me, and it's also scooping from below instead of booming from above. So you're probably hearing less room sound. And obviously this is also a microphone that's very much voiced for broadcast. Also, I have a compressor on here. Let's see what else I have going on here. I do have a gate turned on here. Got a compressor turned on here. No de-esser though. So yeah, it's a very different experience. So that's important to keep. Let's go ahead and switch back to the Rycote. And we're coming back to the Rycote. This is the Rycote CA08. It is in a boom position just up here, just out of the frame, so that you can hear what that sounds like. Okay. Oh, Michael says the 641 gets his vote. Very good. Before we move on to that, let me just make a comment. I find that the Sheps is not a bad microphone. I don't usually like the way it sounds on most voices directly in the recorder. I usually feel like I have to EQ it, but it EQs very well. So that's my perspective on the Sheps. Anyway. Mark says, amazingly, I'm liking the Rycote over the CMC 641. After a little EQ, that may change. I completely agree. I think both of them are capturing enough of all the frequencies without coloring them so much that you could EQ them and get them sounding very, very similar and produce a very, very good sound in the end for dialogue. Mark, CMC seems to have lost the bottom end over the Rycote. MKH50 wins the day. Okay, thanks, Mark. Sheps, we'll fix it in post. That's the best joke of the live stream so far. Camille, thank you very much. I actually honestly do feel that way. Whenever I use the CMC 641, I do feel like it's a great capture, but it does need some EQ before I'm really, really happy with the final results for most voices. There are very few voices where maybe Mike Delgadio, maybe if we put him on this, it would sound great. His voice sounds great on almost every mic, but yeah, some thoughts there. Okay.
Could they have actually tuned that to some really great voiceover?
Well, so Danny's question was, could they have tuned that to some great voiceover? And by tuning, usually you use the term voicing for microphones. They certainly could have, and every microphone does have some sort of voicing applied to it. They've tuned it in some fashion. What Sheps philosophically is doing, from my point of view, from my understanding, is that they're trying to get a very even capture so that you can take that capture into post-production and really kind of mold it to what you want from there. So they're trying to, I think the way a lot of the people who are very enthusiastic about Sheps microphones, they think of it as it's a pure capture that then I can do a lot with in post. But okay. My experience is it usually sounds pretty less than optimal right into the recorder.
This is a funny little typo.
We have a funny little typo. Like wine tasting, gotta cleanse the palate. Mark, okay, we have a new top contender here for best joke of the live stream. Good work. And I liked how you spelled wine and palate there.
I think that was
beautifully done.
I think that was unintentional, but it makes it...
whether it was intentional or not. Brian brings up something really great. Sheps sound flatter. I think that is probably true. It does. It captures all the harsh, weird resonances in my voice and doesn't back down from that. It is trying to be true to life, and I would say that's pretty close. The Rycote as a cardioid is certainly more forgiving with your off-axis head turns. Great point, Mark. So that's another important thing. So especially I noticed that with the Audio Technica, which is a hypercardioid polar pattern. I had to be right on to capture my full voice. If I turned or if I moved a little bit, it fell off pretty quickly. So this is the tightest, least forgiving polar pattern of all the microphones we've sampled so far today. So for comparison there. Christopher, for your full review, will you test with wireless transmitters to test the RF shielding claim? I will, indeed. Absolutely, on the plan. I think the Rycote could work for most people. It seems a very accurate microphone, but I tend to just record talking head interviews, so I think I just want soothing, rounded isolation on voices. Yeah, so there's another factor here. Let's go take a look over here on the Mac. And I'm going to let's go to B&H Photo, and let's actually just price this out. So let's look at the Rycote CA08. The CA08 is $499. And of course, compare that to the Sennheiser MKH50, $1,349. So there's definitely a price difference here, and it's interesting to me that of these microphones, I would probably choose the the CA. Well, actually, I would actually like to really try the Rycote Super Cardioid. And I'm trying to remember what that model number is. It'll show us here on the Rycote site. That would be the SC08. So let's see if we've got that here. Here it is, the Super Cardioid 08. It is also $499. Even compare that to, that would probably be the one I'd be most interested in trying. Then compare that, for example, to the Audio-Technica 4053B. There it is. That's a $700 mic, almost twice the price. And I would probably choose the Rycote over that for sure. So just some context there for that. Danny says, I like the Sennheiser MKH due to living in East Texas. Sheps is vulnerable to humidity, where MKH is not. Houston calls itself the humidiplex. It was awfully hot and humid when I was there one time. I will say, yeah, that is, in fact, with the Sheps, it comes with, it now comes in a kit where you can remove the capsule and put it inside of a special isolation, like little plastic tube, so that when you're in a very humid spot, what you need to do is, if you're going to be, for example, recording outdoors and you're coming from an air-conditioned inside space, you'd put it inside that tube, bring the whole kit outside, let it sort of settle for and kind of adjust its temperature for probably 15 or 20 minutes, and then take the capsule out of its tube and put it on the microphone and go from there. You'll be less likely to experience those issues, but definitely still a risk if it's super humid. Whereas the RF bias microphone capsules in the Sennheiser microphones tend to be much more immune to any sort of humidity. They don't tend to have those problems. Whereas with the traditional DC bias microphones, when humidity kind of collects on the capsule itself, it really affects the sound very badly. You get clicks and pops and all sorts of weird stuff, where the RF biased microphones tend not to have that issue. I got to mic James Earl Jones once, and he was on Earthworks SR314, but let's face it, he could be on an Amazon mic and it would sound good. Yep, you're right, Matt. You're absolutely right. Sheps is just going for absolute real sound, no factor to beauty the sound. That's exactly my experience as well, Da Vinci Girl. Completely agree. All right, let's go ahead and pop one of these others on here. Let's look at the, just out of curiosity, let's put the omni-directional on here. You're going to hear, I'm going to guess, a lot more room in this particular mic than you've heard in any of the others that we've put up so far. Again, note that all of these little samples that we've done here today so far, we have not put the foam cover on any of these microphones. We're not using them in super close, so we don't have a lot of issue. We're also not cueing them back and forth, so we don't have that risk. But let's go ahead and put this up here. All right, let me start here. I'm on the cardioid version of the Rycote here. This is the CA08. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you're quite sure of the fact. This is the omnidirectional. This is the Rycote omnidirectional. Definitely hearing a lot of room noise, room tone. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. Just out of curiosity, this is an Omni. I'm going to get up really close to see how much proximity effect there is. 1, 2, 1, 2. There is some. Omnidirectional mics tend generally to be a little less likely to pick up or to kind of really have a lot of proximity effect. So let me go ahead and get up closer on the cardioid version of the mic here. This is the cardioid version of the microphone, and there's probably a lot of bass. All right, Danny's laughing at me. She said, I think she's thinking, don't try to be James Earl Jones. You're not. She's right. So that is the cardioid. So that's omnidirectional. Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that that would be the right mic for this kind of situation, or even for recording dialogue generally. You heard all the resonance of the room. Did you notice that? How it's kind of, even though we have acoustic treatment here, you're still hearing more of the resonance of the room. So that is the omnidirectional microphone. Let's go ahead and try out this bidirectional. This will be fun. Now, this one I'm not so sure I want to put it on the shock mount because I want to kind of move it around a little bit between its two capsules. And this is interesting because this is not a stereo microphone. Keep in mind, this is a mono microphone. However, when you use a microphone like this, a figure 8 polar pattern, one that has sensitivity on this side and this side, but not this side or this side, or this side or this side, then you can actually use it in combination with a cardioid or a supercardioid microphone to do a mid-side. Now you have to do some processing on that as well, and it's a really fascinating technique. But let's go ahead and just listen to this to see what it sounds like. Let me have my headphones on. You're hearing the cardioid boom mic right now here. Let's go ahead and switch over to the bidirectional. Okay, this is the bidirectional mic, and I'm talking on one side. Let me just kind of twist it. Here I am off axis on the bidirectional, and then here is the back of the microphone. Coming back to the front of the microphone, this is the front of the microphone. So this one actually sounds pretty good. I like it. I'm excited to make some mid-side stereo recordings with this. You're hearing a little handling noise here. But that is the bidirectional. I just put it up here. This is the bidirectional microphone. Checking 1, 2, 3. Now I'm back on the cardioid microphone. This one, the bidirectional sounds a little smoother to my ears. I don't know if that's just me. Did you notice that? A little smoother, a little bit less harshness in the mid frequencies on my voice. Hard to tell when you're listening to your own voice, but curious what you all heard there. Interesting sound on the bidirectional. That is the BD10 from Rycote. Okay, well, let's see what people have to say about that.
We have some interim comments.
Okay. Actually, when Christopher's comes through, he brings out a good point. I'd like to highlight
can start
that.
with that.
There is coloration on the off-axis, not just reduction. Good point. So when you're picking up sound off-axis, it is very challenging to design a microphone that doesn't color the off-axis sound too much. It will always color it to some extent. Physics are just really complicated that way. But some of them can color it quite a bit more than others. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the Earthworks for a minute. I'm going to bring the cardioid microphone down so that I can mount it on this handheld shock mount so I can show you the off-axis response. Okay, here we are back on the Earthworks. Very different sound, of course. And I'm going to take this cardioid microphone down so that we can put it in this shock mount down here. Okay, snaps in. Clip it in. Okay, there we go. All right. Connect the cable to the shock mount. All right. I am now on the Rycote, again, the cardioid, And I'm miking in a little bit closer, but let me just, this is on axis right here. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off axis a little slowly. So here I am about 90 degrees off axis, just so you can hear what that sounds like. And then here I am at the back of the microphone. Definitely some funkiness going off there, but it's tricky because when you're listening to this, you're hearing reflected sound picked up in the front, plus direct sound into the back. Here we are again, 90 degrees off axis, and here I am directly into the front of the microphone. That is the cardioid CA08. Let me switch back to the Earthworks. And what I'd like to do is, let's go take a look at the polar pattern for the cardioid version here of the microphone. So if we come back over to the Mac here, cardioid, here are the specs, and let's get the data sheet. Here's the data sheet. Okay. Look at this polar pattern, polar response chart. It is not a perfect cardioid. They are, and I appreciate this about Rycote, they're being very honest about the microphone's response and its sensitivity on the front versus the sides versus the back. So the red is 250 hertz, blue is 1000 hertz, green is 2000 hertz, and this pink is 1500 hertz. Sorry, 15,000 hertz, excuse me. So the higher frequencies here on the back, it's actually at 2000 hertz, where it's much more cardioid. You can see where it actually rejects almost everything at the back of the microphone. But notice on the lower frequencies here, this kind of reddish, orangish line here, it is about 10 dB less sensitive at 250 hertz on the back, but it's still picking up more bass than it's picking up some of these other frequencies, especially that 2000 hertz. So there is definitely some coloration here. But what's really good about this here is that Rycote is being very transparent and honest with us, which I very much appreciate. Whereas if you go to a lot of other manufacturers, especially of lower end mics, what they will do is they'll just have a single line that shows a perfect cardioid pattern. And it's like, I don't think that's actually what it is, because when I listen to the microphone and I talk into the back of it, it doesn't sound like what this little chart here is showing. So anyway, in terms of the overall self noise, that specs in at, let's see, where is it? 13 dB A-weighted of self noise. So that's pretty typical for a pencil condenser, I'd say. Not unusual. So that, cool. Let's go back to the chat and see what's going on in the chat here. Dan, glad I was off work to catch you. Thanks for coming by, Dan. Really good to have you here. Ian says, taking into consideration the price difference, the Rycotes are very credible options. I think that's a good way to put it. Very credible options. In fact, at the $500 and less price, well, I still want to try that super cardioid. I still want to try that, but if it sounds very similar to the cardioid version, but it has a slightly tighter polar pattern on the front, I think that would be a really good choice for those that are working on a tighter budget. They want to work with a microphone that's going to get them all the frequencies they need. They're happy to do a little bit of post-production. In fact, I think you need to do post-production with almost every microphone, to be honest, but it's a good point. Matt, you're still not James Earl Jones, Curtis Judd Audio. You're right. I'm not. Definitely not. Surprisingly pleasant voice with the bi-directional. Easy listening is back. There you go. Easy listening is back. How much gain to drive the CA08? Great question. Let me just take, I was applying, let's see here. Depending on the microphone, we were applying 48 to 52 dB of gain for the CA08, just to get it volume matched with the others. All of them were pretty close. All of them were within that range, basically, as well. Thomas says, any other consumer level super cardioid small diaphragm condensers? I see cardioid SDCs and short shotguns for under $500, but the only super cardioid SDCs I find are the Octava 012 and the Rycote SC08. Audix has one, the SCX1, I think it's called. We sampled that one a long time ago, probably in 2016, so almost 10 years ago. It was pretty good. It was a little bit on the noisy side in terms of self-noise, so it wasn't like a really clear, strong go for this one kind of endorsement. In my experience, I borrowed it from B&H along with several others. I actually honestly preferred the sound of the Rode NT5, believe it or not. Even though the NT5 didn't have as tight of a polar pattern, the overall sound was nicer directly into the recorder, and it was less noisy as well, as I recall. All right, Danny asks, have you reviewed the Rycote Nano Shields? Yes, both on my main channel, Curtis Judd, and 2 weeks ago here in the live stream, we actually got the Nano Shield out and had a look at it as well. Yeah.
Here's a can of worms.
Here is a can of worms. Danny says, can you put in your main review channel the pros, cons, and summary conclusion to the beginning of your video? I can, but I've stopped doing that because YouTube has done some things that in my mind are not great for doing that kind of thing. They are optimizing their algorithm. I've actually talked about this on my main channel. What I do is I put the summary, the written summary at the end now, so you can jump ahead. We have it notated in the index, so you can jump straight to it if that's what you want to do. But I don't put it at the start anymore because YouTube, in short, punishes those videos if I do that, because some people will watch the intro, watch the summary, and then click off and go do something else. I did it initially to respect people's time because I know that not every single piece of gear that I cover, everyone wants to know about it in depth, so more for informational purposes. But the problem is if people do click off, then what happens is that video gets shown less and less and less and less to other people, and overall fewer people ever see it and fewer people watch it. So that's why I now put the summaries at the end. Not a can of worms, actually. We have talked about that pretty substantially. So,
Okay, and on a lighter note?
Lighter note, you have 2 items in your shopping cart. What's your next purchase? Oh, no. Don't switch to the Mac yet. I don't know what those items are. I need to go look. Camille, you rascal. You have a very sharp eye there. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, yeah, you can show this. That's fine. So
exciting.
It's really exciting. So there's an SD card from SanDisk, and there is a Blackmagic Design HyperDeck Shuttle HD. If we go back to the agenda, Danny, for those that have very practiced eyes, you will notice lately that the waveform has not been animated on this SuperSource screen right here. So that background waveform is not animated. And the reason for that is that my ridiculously expensive rack mount HyperDeck has decided that it just wants to be truculent and doesn't want to play well. And in fact, I can actually play it. Watch what happens when I play it. If you are sensitive to motion or flashing, I'm warning you now, you probably want to look away. But for everyone else, let's go ahead and see if I can get that playing here. Here it goes.
Where do I go? Oh,
This is what it's doing now.
Ew.
So nothing changed whatsoever. So I have no idea why. I've spent probably 3 hours trying to troubleshoot it and fix it, copying on different versions of the file, using different drives, so on and so forth. And frankly, that thing is ridiculously loud. I have to put it out in the other room. I'm looking to simplify my setup, so I'm looking instead at this, if you go back to the Mac here, looking instead at this Blackmagic Design HyperDeck Shuttle HD, and I haven't bought it yet because I am also considering, I think Aaron Parecki covered at one point how to use a Raspberry Pi for playback.
Oh.
Maybe I'll just do that instead. I'm not sure yet. So I don't typically have to record with the HyperDecks. I'm usually just trying to play back from them. So maybe my use case isn't really a fit for those very well. Firmware change on the HyperDeck? Nope. No firmware. No, it's an old one. It's one that I don't even think they make anymore. So that's part of the issue, I think. I got 100K in my shopping cart, but I haven't got the job yet.
It's time for an intervention.
Yeah, Matt, Danny has just declared that it's time for an intervention, so we'll be contacting your wife and all of your children and grandchildren momentarily. All right, friends, I think, oh, we have a couple more. Oh, Ian, thank you so much for the very generous super chat. Appreciate that. I wanted to say thanks. You are offering such great content and have been consistently doing so for many years. Thanks so much for dropping by, Ian. I appreciate that so much. All right, friends, get out there, make some great sound this week, and we'll be back with you next week. Take care.